Thank you for standing by and welcome to the Coda Minerals CEO briefing. All participants are in a listen-only mode. There will be a presentation followed by a question and answer session. If you wish to ask a question, you will need to press the star key followed by the number 1 on your telephone keypad. I would now like to hand the call over to Mr. Chris Stevens, CEO. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining the Coda Minerals briefing today. I can see on the screen that there's a few people still joining, so I'll just sort of talk briefly to the plan for the call and the agenda while people are still joining, and then get into the main part of the call. So this is the second one of these CEO briefings that we've held, and it's really part of a commitment to transparency to make sure that people that I might not necessarily talk to have the opportunity to sort of get the inside briefing to understand a little bit more from myself. And also Colin Moorhead, who is our most senior geoscientist, is on our board. He's also on the call as a presenter, and I will sort of pass over to him at various points during the presentation as well, just to add some of his thoughts. And also within the Q&A, you'll have the opportunity to ask us really anything you want from corporate through to sort of highly technical if you so wish. I'll keep this relatively high level. Obviously, we are talking about a technical subject, but really sort of try and more talk about the so what and put a little bit more information around the most recent release, primarily for the Emmy Bluff Deeps deposit. So the plan for the call, I'm assuming that most people are pretty familiar with the company. I'll give a 1-minute introduction just for any new people on the call who are not so familiar with our sort of recent history from the listing. Then talk to the Emmy Bluff copper cobalt deposit, which is, I think, a very important topic and with really exciting news flow coming very soon. Then move on to the Emmy Bluff Deeps IOCG as well. I won't spend a lot of time on the other exploration assets and Cameron River today. We did just put out an announcement on Cameron River yesterday. And it's actually pretty exciting stuff, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that a bit more. But we've had some great results out of Cameron River, so I'd refer you back to that. But very happy to answer questions as well. So as the sort of call participants really increase over the last couple of minutes, I'll sort of move forward now into the main part of the presentation. Obviously, just as an introduction to the company, we listed in October 2020. It was 1 year ago today, so it is our sort of listing birthday. And I don't think we've taken actually a breath to stop and think about that, as the team is all pretty busy at the moment with the drilling at Emmy Bluff Deeps and the resource at Emmy Bluff. But it is an exciting day, and we've had a great year. It's been very rapid growth. We listed at 30 cents. The share price is sort of generally hovering in the 90 cent to $1 mark at the moment, and I think that's quite reflective of the very standard sort of trajectory of exploration companies that are really starting to move the dial, and we're very pleased about that. 100 million shares on issue, just under, and no debt. It's a really tightly held structure. The really interesting thing for me is that the top 20 has increased their holding by about 3% since the IOCG news, and the support that I get is fantastic. And one of the parts of my job I enjoy the absolute most is talking to the many technical specialists and fund managers, and often learning a lot as well in terms of the way that they view what we're doing. And I can say so far the support has been exceptional and really gives us all a lot of energy and confidence that we're moving in the right direction. So the primary assets of the company are at Elizabeth Creek in South Australia. It's a joint venture with Torrens Mining. It is a contributing joint venture, 70% owned by Coda. Coda has the right to acquire another 5% by exercising an option for $1.5 million. Clearly that option is in the money. As I say, it's a contributing JV with Coda putting in 70% of the costs and Torrens putting in 30% of the costs. Coda manages the JV and effectively runs everything on a day-to-day basis, though we do maintain a very good relationship and have a very strong JV co, which especially on technical matters is very helpful. So the areas of focus at Emmy Bluff, again, the Zambian-style copper cobalt asset at Emmy Bluff has a maiden resource expected in Q4 this year. Emmy Bluff Deeps is usually the majority of the focus that people are on these sorts of calls for, and it will be the focus of this call today. And then additional deposits as well, 2 existing indicated deposits and the Elaine IOCG prospect, as well as several other Zambian-style prospects. So I'll first talk to Emmy Bluff, and I'll just spend a couple of minutes on this, but I think it's really important, especially with exciting news flow coming. Emmy Bluff is a shale-hosted Zambian-style copper-cobalt deposit. It's very much analogous to the Kufa-Schäfer in Poland or Central Europe, as well as many of the copper-cobalt deposits that are mined in Central Africa, Zambia, DRC. It's the style of mineralization that, to be honest, we understand the best at Elizabeth Creek. We've been working on a long time. I've been involved with the project for 4 years. And we were really looking for more scale and grade. We found it at Emmy Bluff, and we have been working since listing to bring this up to an inferred resource. A year from listing, we are very, very close to that maiden resource. And we expect to deliver that resource towards the end of November. We're saying Q4 because the critical path is, and frankly always will be at the moment, the assay labs, who are doing an incredibly good job but are very busy. And so we will very confident that that will be delivered within the next month. We're also doing a lot of work on the sort of understanding the mining and metallurgy of the deposit. We have a running start here. I would say we are far more advanced than one would normally expect a company at this stage of exploration, i.e. pre-inferred resource, to be, because we've been working on the indicated deposits. So why does this matter? Well, we're making great progress on the studies. We are working after, frankly, having some challenges finding the right people to understand, especially the mining side of things. You know, we're now working with the A team. I'm very confident we've got the right people and really excited about that. The metallurgy is something we've worked on a long time, and we're really starting to understand, and we're making great progress. I mean, to me, the sort of choice variables are between good and better, and that's a great place to be. We've just hired a world-class study manager to start pulling things together as well. So things are going well. What to expect from the resource, I honestly don't know at this point. I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to getting the next stage of the work done. I think you should be expecting a really good, solid, peer comparable resource within the next 4 weeks or so. And it's starting to look like there's a lot of copper between the indicated resources and what will be likely be an inferred resource at Emmy Bluff Deeps, with significant expansion. We've just identified a whole area to the east of Emmy Bluff as well, this is starting to look like a lot of copper in what I believe very strongly will be a massive copper bull market. There are also potential synergies with Emmy Bluff Deeps. It's less than 1 kilometre away. It's 400 metres above it. And as I talk to Emmy Bluff Deeps, I think it's worth bearing in mind that we're dealing with a system that is hugely copper rich, very much likely coming from the same mineralizing structures as well. And one of the challenges with getting down deep is less cost and more time. So if you've got a material resource above it as you're working down towards the depth, then that really starts to mitigate things. Probably jumping ahead in terms of looking at that, but it's always something to keep in mind as we work through this strategically. You've got to have an eye for the future, and it gives me a lot of confidence that we've got indicated deposits essentially very close to surface. We'll have an inferred resource at that sort of 400 meter depth mark. As I say, high quality mining and metallurgy studies ongoing at the moment, resource coming, and then working on the deeps. Probably a good point to move on to the deeps now, and I'll talk for about sort of 6-7 minutes on this, and then maybe hand over to Colin for some of his views as well. This is clearly an area of great excitement for our investors, and it's been a primary driver in our share price performance over the past 4 months. It is obviously a deeper deposit. It's a more traditional iron oxide copper gold, which this area is most well known. Is a high probability it's related to the Emmy Bluff mineralization, of course. In June, we announced 200 meters of strong alteration with what was then assayed to be over 35 meters at 1%, peak grades at 5%. Since then, we have effectively completed about 12 holes, 4 parents and 8 wedges, with 2 new wedges just commencing as we speak today. And we've gone from, on the last call, we effectively had 1 assayed hole and visuals from a couple of others over about 100 meters. In just over 3 months, we've completed an enormous amount of work. We've had 1 hole up in the north, essentially a bit of a failed hole, but since then 4 additional holes, very strongly bornite dominant. Now for, talking IOCG donation, we're seeing that classic pyrite, chalcopyrite to bornite, and even in 1 hole, some native copper. And effectively, without going into the sort of technical details of that, what that's really doing is moving through a higher tenor of copper. Tenor is really a proxy word for grade in many ways. Bornite is generally the good stuff. It's the really high grade copper-bearing mineral that you see in the core of IOCGs, and that gives the headline numbers that you see out of other IOCGs like Carapatina and Oak Dam West. And we're seeing that zonation, and that's really important because it tells us that we're proximal to a major source. Effectively, you don't get that concentration of copper without proximity to something that's really moving it. And that gives us a lot of confidence in our exploration model. So 4 strongly bornite dominant holes. The remainder of the holes have been varying degrees of chalco, which is still a very strong copper-bearing sort of mineralization, and the primary sort of copper-bearing mineral that you see on the apron of IOCGs. There tends to be a small but very, very high-grade bornite core surrounded by a sort of a lower-grade chalcopyrite mineralization. And I'll talk to that sort of grade in a minute because I think it's a really important question. So we have generally seen a trend of the holes getting better since that first hole that created so much excitement. EBD2 was probably a lower tenor of mineralization, and in our most recent sort of visual announcement, we put an enormous amount of information in the tables, which I appreciate is relatively difficult to read. Ultimately, I think we have to wait for the assays, and there's no way to get around it and sort of remain compliant with ASX listing rules, which, to be quite frank, are mostly there for good reason and to ensure that companies are accurately describing what they see. Sometimes it's frustrating for me that the technical geologists that I talk to can read that and interpret an awful lot of it, and it's harder for investors that are not geologically trained. Really, in that announcement, what's super important to understand is, especially in the EBD3 wedge 2, which is the most recently completed wedge hole, that's by far and away our best hole to date, 67 meters of mineralization spread over two horizons or 2 loads of mineralization, and that upper is very, very strong. It is, certainly from visual estimates, significantly more copper rich than our best assay hole to date at hole 18, wedge 2. So that's pretty exciting. It gives us a lot of confidence in the model, and it also gives us a lot of confidence that we're moving in the right direction as we're sort of following a trend towards the northeast and to the southeast primarily. So to address the sort of size of this thing, and there's an element in it, to some extent it's early days, and there's an element of jumping ahead here, but I think it's important just to again put that back into context. It's always the elephant in the room for any discovery. At what point is, whether this is a technical or a true sort of, world-class discovery, at what point does that question get answered? I think people tend to look at these historical discoveries, whether it's, De Grusa or Carapatina, even to an extent Oak Dam West, which is still very, very, early stages of understanding, with a lens of hindsight. And I think, when you're actually in it day by day, you've really just got to follow the trends. And as I said, the holes do appear to be getting stronger, thicker, more mineralized for the most part as we sort of follow that bornite core. But we've gone from 1 assayed hole, 2 visuals across 120 meters. We've now got 3 assayed holes, 5 more visuals released. So in terms of scale, we've got drill back mineralization over about 300 by 200 meters, and there's a clear high-grade bornite core. We've done that in about 3 months. Not always sure we get quite enough credit for that expansion at the moment, but it is a lot of work and a lot of expansion of what was really just one original hole when things took off in June. One of the interesting things about this, obviously, you're dealing with the volume of the severe underground. When you're talking about contained tons, obviously, you've got the factor, pi squared effectively comes into the equation, and 100 meters of distance when you're dealing with these pretty reasonable thicknesses starts to increase the potential contained tonnage significantly. So yes, we are jumping ahead a little bit, but I think it's important to understand as we add 50, 100 meters to these stacked loads, you're starting to deal with a lot of copper. And, as I say, it's far too early days to be able to publicly estimate anything on what that is, but please understand we do our 3D models internally, and we, again, believe we're chasing the right things, absolutely. Again, it is utterly unconstrained to the west, to the southeast, and to the northeast. The mineralization sort of more chalco dominant to the west. That may be a trend, or that may be just part of sort of the edge of another mineralizing structure or a main mineralizing structure. One thing I've learned about Emmy Bluff Deeps is it does have the ability to sometimes sort of throw you curveballs. So we will need to go and test out to the west. We're currently following trends to the northeast, where the mineralization is unconstrained for 800 meters until SA4, which is still one of the most strongly mineralized historical holes, and the southeast. And to be frank with you, going down to the southeast is right now where my expectation of sort of the best results is coming from. We are commencing EBD3 Wedge 3, and that will really, again, be chasing that trend down to the southeast. So my gut feel, and I don't have to drill back to evidence other than what we've already released in that very strong hole at EBD3 Wedge 2, is that moving towards that southeast is the right thing to be testing. As I said, in Bluff Deeps does sometimes throw you curveballs, so we will work through the results when we have them. And just again, to be clear, we're just commencing that hole, so we do not yet have those results, but I have to say I'm quite excited. So that size, look, as I say, we're dealing with a reasonably large area. We've taken it from one hole to 300 by 200 meters. We expect to increase that size over the coming weeks and months. Grade, another interesting conversation here. I think if people see the headline grades at Oak Dam West, and they really see, they really expect every hole in an IOCG to be that 3 to 6%. And make no mistake, there are holes, that can and should be in any IOCG in those regions. But the primary bulk of tonnage in an IOCG comes from the lower grade chalcopyrite dominant areas. Bornite is nice, that gives you the early cash flow if you can get to it. Bornite is the higher grade. It's generally more than twice the tenor grade of mineralization that you see in chalco zones. But looking at those grades in IOCGs, Prominent Hill around about 1%, Carapatina, the resource grade 0.57% copper, Olympic Dam is about 0.7% roughly in the resource. Generally, these are mining in the plus 1% sort of when you apply a sensible cutoff and a mine plan. And again, grade is a function of tons, more tons, lower grade, and vice versa. It's a grade tonnage curve. But make no mistake, the intercepts to date, and I'm not making any comparison about size, stage, or anything else, but the intercepts to date within this area are very comparable with the sort of grades that you see in the reserve, as well as materially higher than generally the resource. As we start to expand this, one would expect, to be able to put some more understanding around that. But the intercepts to date are very much within the absolute bounds, and frankly higher bounds, of what one generally sees in IOCGs in this region. That does not mean that this will extend forever, or that this is a pre-resource stage, but the intercepts to date have been very strong. Again, what that tells us is as we keep going, we should expect to be able to increase that scale. And that, that's again a very exciting place to be. Gives a lot of confidence in our model. So in terms of challenges, the next few months are going to be very important to the future of the company. I think for me, there's no doubt now that this is now very valuable sort of copper exploration real estate. I don't think we're ever going to, we can't go back to a point where this hasn't occurred, i.e. pre-June. This is very prospective. There is clearly a major mineralizing system. And we believe that we will be able to sort of capitalize on that as well. Exploration is what happens to you when you're busy making plans. So we have to be able to react with the information as we get it. So that's really where I see the current situation. I'll talk briefly to what next, and then sort of hand over to Colin for some of his thoughts as well. But really, right now, we're just completing, or it's roughly ending today, a twin of EBD3 wedge 2, which was the really great hole. It's sort of 20, 30 meters further to the east, and that will feed into our next steps. We are also completing a second wedge at EBD2, which you'll remember is the hole that sort of had about 300 meters of chalcopyrite, albeit at a very lower grade of lower tenor of mineralization. And really that's structured chasing there. And we'll be moving on to wedge 3, which is down to the southeast of currently our best hole to date, which is that 67-meter intercept over 2 stacked loads of EBD3 wedge 2. The numbers even trip me up, which is quite frustrating at times. From here, what next? So we're really chasing that southeastern high-grade sort of bornite trend. Cautious step out is the current plan, approximately 4 to 5 parent holes with approximately 4 to 6 wedge holes. And as I said, you've got to be able to react with the plans, but so nothing is set in stone. But this plan, we expect, will test the anomaly thoroughly. We'll really be testing both, out to the west, further to the southeast, further to the northeast, and then possibly over to the other side of the anomaly into the magnetite predominant area, just to test the other side of this. When you look at the IOCGs, they often have a barren core, and the weakest historical intercepts are further over to the east. So we would look to test that other side as well. I think that's an important thing to do. Obviously, as we go along, we need to be able to react to that. So what do we think we're going to get for it? Well, I guess to start with sort of the downside risk, we have multiple pieces of evidence that we're proximal to major mineralizing structures. We're seeing that IOCG zonation. The tenor of copper is, materially higher than I have seen in peers and other sort of comparable discoveries at this stage, other than really sort of the famous ones that we all know. And, that gives us a lot of confidence. I cannot find any evidence where these sort of intercepts have been found and then there has not resulted in sort of a major discovery. Generally you see sort of 100, 200 meters of very diffuse low-grade stuff, but not backed up by that zonation. So we believe we're working in the right area. Obviously, sometimes this can take longer than one hopes or expects. Sometimes you've got to go back to the geophysics. So, the definitive evidence may not come of a structure immediately, or frankly, it could come in the next hole. And that's just part of exploration. And anyone that tells you any different is frankly not someone you should be listening to. Exploration is sometimes challenging. But that sort of leads through the midpoint. We have this amazing zonation. We have the increasing quality, increasing thickness through the drill holes. As I said, dealing with sort of volume of the sphere underground, relatively minor increases in distance do result in major increases in sort of the potential copper inventory. And I call this the relentless forward case, which is effectively we keep drilling, we keep adding mineralization, and that ends up adding up to a significant hole. That is sort of, I guess, my base case. And that is really what I'm expecting to see at this point, other than the sort of high case. And to be frank, everyone wants that hole that's the full stop at the end of the sentence, the definitive one. It may come. We've got all the evidence in the world that we are very close to major proximal mineralizing structure. What we haven't really got yet is significant brecciation, and that's where the rock breaks up and creates the space for it to come out. But as I say, we have evidence of brecciation, we have evidence of the bornite, we have the trends. So as we chase down, especially towards that southeast, that is what we are expecting to see as really our sort of prime part of our exploration model. So it's rarer to see definitive holes in copper than I think most people think. Nickel tends to be a little bit more definitive. But again, as we're chasing that, we would look to either come across significant extensions to these stacked lodes, which start to add up to major increases in the total mineralization, and it's probably more likely both, the sort of proximity to that finding that structure which creates the brecciation in the space for the copper to really sort of concentrate as well. And the bornite is really what gives us that huge confidence that that's what we're aiming for right now. So I guess in conclusion, we've taken a single hit to now 8 released holes. We've increased the mineralization from 1 lode in 1 hole to 300 by 200 with 2 clear stack lodes, and the likelihood of a third with some drill back evidence for that. It's starting to get serious. There are multiple potential cases going forwards, ranging from that sort of major brecciated structure, which may be proximal to the sort of bornite-rich areas, through to really that continuation of the stacked lodes. And frankly, both of these cases are exceptional and should be very strong for the future of the company. We have a clear plan to test this. We know what we're doing. We know how to execute this plan. We've got exceptional drillers, and frankly, we just need to get on with it, and that's what we're doing. So, clear plan, excellent prospectivity, and we're pretty happy. In terms of the news flow, assays will be coming within the next 4 weeks or so from the 5 visually released holes. I think these will be a game changer because it takes difficult to read tables into something that is, frankly, much more, much simpler to understand. I think that will be very important for us. Visuals from the next holes. I don't like releasing hole by hole because the whole point of doing wedges is that you get to test and understand an area better. So releasing too early really can mislead. I don't like doing that. So once we understand, we will look to release visuals. And then, of course, the icing on the cake will be the Emmy Bluff resource as well. So a lot of news flow coming. I realise I've probably spoken a bit longer than I said I would. So with that, I'll hand over to Colin and then maybe hand over some questions as well.
Thanks, Chris, and g'day everyone. Listen, my thoughts on this are, the discovery process in many ways is a pretty simple one. You have to select the right ground, and there is no doubt that Elizabeth Creek is an excellent tenement in a very copper-rich part of the world. The second thing you need to do is generate targets. Now, the Elizabeth Creek, so the Emmy Bluff Zambian style targets are pretty obvious, but it was a very special piece of geophysics that targeted Emmy Bluff Deeps, which is essentially a coincident mag high, gravity low anomaly. Then the next step in the discovery process is drill testing and intercepting ore grade intercepts, and in my previous life, two or three ore grade intercepts was enough to trigger you through to an advanced exploration target status, and we've clearly got that here at Emmy Bluff Deeps and some. Just to put some context on it, I think the tallest building in Perth, the Rio building, is about 250 metres. So these parent holes are 3 or 4 times that height, which is why we use wedging tactics to sort of try and get 4 intercepts for the price of 1 parent hole here. And through using those tactics, the company's been able to rapidly get to that advanced exploration target status. The next step, of course, is getting to an inferred resource, which means you've defined enough copper copper accumulated to have a reasonable expectation of eventual economic extraction, and that's the step we're in today. These things are notoriously hard to drill. you've just got to read the history of Oak Dam, West, Carrapateena and Olympic Dam to know that, because of that depth, you really you have to be careful with how you drill your holes and learn from every hole as it comes along, and that's the process we're in now. And my view on the world is you've got to fail fast or succeed fast, and there's no doubt we've done a lot in a very short period of time here. The next step, of course, is you're at a resource stage, and excitingly, and it's sort of getting a little bit lost in the conversation, is Emmy Bluff is about to land its maiden resource just down the road. So all in all, there's a lot of copper here. It's really exciting. There's definitely something there. Whether it turns into a resource or not we'll see in the future. But it's certainly a very, very exciting project and worthy of running to ground. With that, Chris, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Colin. I really appreciate the insight, and just for investors, Colin's a non-exec director, but I think it's a red A, we don't speak, and the technical input is incredibly powerful, having that knowledge to support our own sort of internal executive exploration team. So we do work very hard on this, and we think about this a lot. It's a very exciting project for us, so we're putting a commensurate amount of effort, thought, and passion into it as well. Now, I'll sort of pause here for any questions. If anyone has any questions, Colin and I will be more than happy to answer them. I can't see any come through on the queue. I'm not sure how that works, Ari, but...
It's okay. Mr. Stevens, I'll prompt the participants again just on how to ask a question. So if you'd like to ask a question, please press star, then 1, and wait for your name to be announced. And if you're on a speakerphone, please pick up the handset to ask your question. So to ask a question, please press star, then 1. Let's pause for a moment to see if there are any questions. We do have a question from Jonathan Boyd. Please go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Hi,
I wanted to know a little bit more about the fact that the copper deposits are quite deep. I'm an accountant by trade, so I don't know anything about mining per se, but can you comment more on the fact that the depths of these copper deposits, does that make them less viable?
I'll answer it briefly, and maybe Colin, who has a lot of underground experience, can sort of talk to the more technical side of things. My background's in sort of mine project valuation and modelling of economics of mineral projects, and I would say clearly there are advantages to open pit mining, but both sort of forms of mining are very common, occur all over the world. They mine down to sort of plus 2,000 meters underground, especially in South Africa. And really the economics of that, the advantage stroke disadvantage, is a function of size and grade. Obviously a high grade, large deposit is going to be much more economic to mine than a smaller one, especially if you have the sort of development capital of getting down there. The cost to get down is not generally a major issue and is, in my experience, preferable often to a large pre-strip. So a surface deposit is great if it's relatively close to surface, but something that's a little bit further or undercover with sort of very hard rock could be a lot harder, more expensive and less economic to mine than an underground deposit, for example. The generally disadvantages are getting down there in terms of time, and that is where having surface deposits and effectively stages going from deposits at 20 meters below the ground down to 800 could potentially be a material advantage for the project. And also, once you're down there, you're not dealing with major strip ratio aspects. So obviously you can't mine an open pit just straight horizontally. You have that sort of terrace look that you can see in the pictures, probably the best way to describe it. And so you are often moving material which is not ore, which is not something that's mineral bearing. Once you're down there, generally everything you're in is ore, and you effectively come in. I know Colin likens it to a sort of modern day coal mine with Emmy Bluff, for example. The flip side of that is you are dealing with making sure that you've got the pillars, you've got hanging wall competency, and there are various other aspects, and that's something we're working through at the moment. But in short, yes, it is generally more expensive to mine underground. There are very low-cost bulk mining techniques, which I know are being applied at Carrapateena, for example, but really everything is a function of grade and size. Did you have anything to add, Colin?
Yeah, that's generally true. I think that the key thing here is that, all the easy open cut stuff sticking out of the ground has been exhausted and the world's going underground, and so the technologies are improving. But in general, the deeper you are, the higher the cut-off grade that you need to make the mine viable, and the more tonnes per vertical metre you can get, the easier that becomes. The other things you've got to deal with at depth include, rock stress and heat. So there are technical challenges getting deeper, but the technology's moving pretty quickly as well. Just a reminder that to qualify as a mineral resource under JORC, something has to have a reasonable expectation of mining. So you would need to go through all those boxes and have enough metal accumulated in one spot to satisfy those criteria.
One last question, if I may. Is the Coda model to actually undertake that mining yourself, or is the model to, in some way, sell the reserves or work on a commission for the reserves, or what is the model?
Look, our model is simply to drive the best possible value we can for our shareholders, and I have to say I have some cynicism when I look at exploration companies that decide to go mining. Sometimes it is a factor of, people really are excited by the idea of doing it, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. My approach is to keep an open mind. I generally believe that sort of complex deposits should be mined by companies that have the right level of experience. So if Coda were to go a long way down that path, we would have a major operational readiness challenge ahead, and that's something I'm quite certain we could rise to, but it may not necessarily be the best path. So the one thing that I hold absolutely true, and I've really never seen an exception to this rule, is that whether you intend to commercialize it through sale, JV, or your own production, you absolutely have to act from day one as if you are going to be the one that owns it. If you fail to do that, then it will drive poor behaviours in terms of studies, in terms of the economics, in terms of your exploration model, and all of the ways that you act. Any exploration company says, no, it's fine, we'll just sell it, will then drive poor behaviours. And so we always work as if this is something that, we will be the ones that inherit whatever the work we do now. And companies that do acquire projects generally employ very smart people who can see through those poor behaviours as well. So that drives poor commercial outcomes for shareholders. There's possibly a long answer, which is we have an open mind, but we are absolutely working with the best sort of intents and the highest levels of technical excellence from day one, to make sure that we can have optionality in terms of commercialization in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I'll just give a final reminder to see if there are any more questions, and that is to please press star then one if you'd like to ask a question. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star then one. Let's give it a moment. Mr. Stevens, there doesn't appear to be any further questions. I'll hand the call back to you for closing comments. Thanks.
Look, thank you very much. So thanks for those questions. They were both really excellent, very excellent points. Probably two of the most regularly asked questions when I give investor briefings, sort of privately. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. It's quite a long time to listen to someone talk. I hope it's has been of help. I try to personally answer every single query that comes in to the info line, which comes straight to my email. So it's info@codaminerals.com. We don't have a full-time receptionist, so calls do get answered or returned, but email is the best way. And if do try and answer everything. So if you have any questions, if anything comes up, please just drop us a message, and we will look to probably follow up with another one of these calls in mid-December once we've got resource and assays out as well to put some more context around that. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out. With that, thank you very much for your time, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That concludes today's call. Thank you for joining us. You may now disconnect your line.